Europe is undergoing a transformation that's impossible to ignore. In 2024 alone, which isn't even over yet, over 1.2 million people entered the European Union, with hundreds of thousands more arriving in the UK. The impact? In countries like France and the UK, nearly 20% of the population now hails from non-European backgrounds, reshaping the continent's cultural and demographic landscape. With native populations shrinking and immigration communities growing, the Europe we once knew is changing before our very eyes. But what does this mean for the future of the continent? The demographic landscape of Europe is undergoing a significant transformation, largely driven by the influx of immigrants over the past several decades. If you take a closer look, the numbers tell a story that's hard to ignore. In 2022 alone, around 1.2 million people entered the European Union through regular channels, while approximately 300,000 made their way in irregularly. The United Kingdom saw about 700,000 regular migrants arrive, along with an additional 40,000 irregular entries. When you consider that these numbers have remained fairly consistent year after year, it's easy to see how the makeup of Europe's population is changing. The steady flow of immigrants, especially those from non-European countries, is starting to tip the balance. Let's take the UK as an example. Once a country with a predominantly white British population, the UK has seen a noticeable shift in its demographic makeup. Today, about 75% of the British population identifies as native white, while nearly 20% of the population comes from a non-European background. This change isn't limited to the UK. France, too, has experienced a similar shift, with a growing proportion of its population hailing from non-European origins. In fact, many Western European countries now have a higher share of foreign-born residents than the United States, a country traditionally known for its immigrant-friendly policies. One of the key factors contributing to this demographic shift is the Schengen area, which has effectively eliminated borders between EU countries. This has made it easier for Europeans to move around, but it's also added complexity to the issue of immigration. While the Schengen area facilitates the movement of European nationals, it also indirectly encourages the movement of non-European immigrants, who often first enter the EU through one country and then move freely to others. This has led to significant demographic changes, especially in Western and Northern Europe, where the immigrant population has grown substantially. The story of non-European immigration to Europe is one that dates back to the mid-20th century. It all began in the 1950s, when Western European countries, recovering from the devastation of World War II, began to invite guest workers from non-European countries to help rebuild their economies. These guest workers, many from Turkey, North Africa, and South Asia, were initially seen as temporary laborers. However, many of them chose to settle permanently, bringing their families and laying the groundwork for future generations of non-European residents in Europe. The 1990s brought another wave of immigration, this time spurred by the Yugoslav wars. Refugees from the Balkans sought safety in Western Europe, adding to the growing diversity of the region. But it was the migration crisis of the 2010s that truly marked a turning point. The conflict in Syria, along with political instability in parts of Africa and the Middle East, led to an unprecedented number of asylum seekers and refugees arriving in Europe. Countries like Germany, Sweden, and Italy became primary destinations for these new arrivals, further accelerating the demographic shift. To put this into perspective, let's look at some numbers. Sweden, a country often highlighted for its generous asylum policies, has a foreign-born population that accounts for over 20% of its total population. In France, the share of the population with at least one non-European grandparent is around 17%. Even countries with historically low immigration rates, like Ireland and Estonia, have seen significant increases in their foreign-born populations. Comparing this to the United States, a country with a long history of immigration, is revealing. In many Western European countries, the share of the foreign-born population is now higher than in the US. For example, Germany's foreign-born population stands at around 15%, while the US figure is slightly lower. This shift highlights how Europe, once relatively homogeneous, is becoming increasingly diverse. But it's not just about the numbers. The impact of non-European immigration is visible in many aspects of daily life across Europe. In cities like London, Paris, and Berlin, the influence of immigrant communities is palpable. Neighborhoods with a majority non-European population are common. and the cultural landscape of these cities is changing as a result. This demographic transformation is not just a trend, it's a profound shift that is reshaping the identity of Europe. When we talk about immigration in Europe, one of the first things that comes to mind is its impact on the labor market. Immigration has undeniably played a significant role in shaping Europe's workforce, contributing to various sectors and helping to keep the wheels of the economy turning. Think about it. Europe's population is aging, and many countries are grappling with labor shortages in crucial industries. Immigrants have stepped in to fill these gaps, taking on jobs that might otherwise go unfilled. For instance, in countries like Germany, immigrants are a vital part of the labor force, particularly in sectors like manufacturing, construction, and healthcare. In the UK, immigrants have become essential in the National Health Service, or NHS, where a significant percentage of doctors, nurses, and care workers are of non-European origin. The agriculture sector across Europe, from the fruit farms in Spain to the vineyards in France, also relies heavily on immigrant labor. Without these workers, many industries would struggle to even function, and the economic consequences would be severe. But the impact of immigration on the labor market isn't all rosy. There are challenges too. One of the most talked about issues is the pressure on wages. When there's an influx of workers, especially in low-skilled jobs, it can lead to increased competition for those positions. This, in turn, can drive down wages, making it harder for native workers to earn a decent living. This is a concern often raised in countries like Italy and Spain, where unemployment rates are already high, and locals fear that immigrants might take away their jobs or depress their wages. Another challenge is the strain on public services. With more people entering the labor market, there's increased demand for services like healthcare, education, and social housing, especially in countries that are already struggling with budget constraints. In places like Sweden and Denmark, where the welfare state is a cornerstone of society, there's an ongoing debate about whether the system can sustain the additional pressure brought by a growing immigrant population. The welfare state is a key aspect of many European countries, offering a safety net that includes healthcare, education, and employment benefits and pensions. Immigration has added a new dimension to this system, raising questions about its sustainability in the face of demographic changes. On one hand, immigrants contribute to the welfare state by paying taxes and social security contributions. In fact, studies show that immigrants often pay more into the system than they take out, particularly when they're young and working. Take Germany, for example. Immigrants in Germany contribute billions of euros to the country's public finances each year. Many of them are employed in sectors that are vital to the economy, and their tax contributions help support the welfare state. Similarly, in the UK, a study by University College London found that immigrants contributed more in taxes than they received in benefits, particularly those from the European Economic Area. However, the long-term sustainability of the welfare state under the pressure of immigration is a subject of heated debate. Critics argue that as immigrant populations age, they will start to draw more heavily on social services, potentially outstripping their contributions. This is particularly concerning in countries like Sweden and the Netherlands, where generous welfare benefits are a key feature of the social contract. The concern is that if the immigrant population continues to grow at a rapid pace, it could strain public finances, leading to cuts in services or higher taxes for everyone. There's also the issue of integration. For the welfare state to function effectively, there needs to be a sense of social cohesion, a shared understanding that everyone is contributing to and benefiting from the system. If immigrants are perceived as not fully integrating into society, or if they're seen as benefiting disproportionately from welfare services, it can lead to social tensions. This has been a growing concern in countries like France, where debates over national identity and the role of immigrants in society have become increasingly polarized. Immigration is also having a profound impact on Europe's urban landscapes. Cities with high concentrations of immigrant populations are experiencing significant changes, not just culturally, but also economically. As more people move into urban areas, the demand for housing has skyrocketed, leading to a boom in real estate markets in some places. Take London, for instance. The city has long been a magnet for immigrants. and as a result, property prices have soared. Areas that were once affordable are now some of the most expensive in the world, driven in part by the demand from immigrant communities. This has led to concerns about housing availability, with many locals finding it increasingly difficult to afford to live in the city they grew up in. The same trend can be seen in cities like Paris and Berlin, where gentrification is pushing out lower-income residents, many of whom are immigrants or from immigrant backgrounds. But it's not just about rising property prices. Immigration is also driving the development of new infrastructure to accommodate the growing population. In cities like Amsterdam and Stockholm, we're seeing significant investment in public transport, schools, and healthcare facilities, all designed to meet the needs of a more diverse and populous city. This has economic benefits too. Construction projects create jobs, and new infrastructure can boost local economies. However, there are challenges here as well. In some cases, the rapid growth of immigrant population has led to overcrowding and a strain on existing infrastructure. In cities like Brussels, the influx of immigrants has outpaced the city's ability to expand its housing and public services, leading to tensions between native residents and newcomers. Moreover, there's the issue of ethnic segregation, where immigrant communities are concentrated in specific neighborhoods, leading to a lack of integration and the potential for social unrest. When we start thinking about the future of Europe's population, one of the key factors that comes into play is birth rates, especially among immigrant populations. It's a fascinating and complex issue because birth rates among immigrant families are generally higher than those of native Europeans. This isn't just a temporary trend. It has profound implications for how Europe's demographic landscape will evolve over the coming decades. In countries like the UK, France, and Denmark, immigrant populations tend to have more children than their native counterparts. For example, in the UK, data shows that birth rates among immigrant families, particularly those from South Asia and Africa, are significantly higher than those of white British families. This difference in birth rates means that over time, the proportion of the population with immigrant backgrounds will continue to grow. In France, a similar pattern is observed, with higher birth rates among North African and Sub-Saharan African immigrants compared to the native French population. Denmark provides another interesting case. Although it has a relatively smaller immigrant population compared to countries like Germany or the UK, the birth rates among non-Western immigrants in Denmark are still higher than those of native Danes. This has led to a gradual increase in the proportion of the population with immigrant backgrounds. And when you think about it, these higher birth rates among immigrant families don't just affect the present. They're setting the stage for the future demographic makeup of Europe. Now, why does this matter? Well, as the native European population continues to age and shrink, these higher birth rates among immigrant populations could help offset some of the demographic decline. But it also means that Europe is likely to become more ethnically and culturally diverse in the years ahead. Population projections suggest that by 2050, the proportion of the population in Western European countries with immigrant backgrounds could be significantly higher than it is today. This shift will inevitably influence everything from social dynamics to economic policies. As Europe's population becomes more diverse, the big question on everyone's mind is, will these immigrant populations integrate into the broader society, or will they remain isolated in ethnic enclaves? The answer to this question will shape the future of Europe in profound ways. On one hand, there's the possibility of successful integration, where immigrant communities blend into the broader fabric of European society. This isn't just about immigrants learning the local language or adopting certain cultural practices. It's about creating a truly multicultural society where different ethnic groups coexist and contribute to the nation's identity. One of the indicators of this kind of integration is intermarriage, when people from different ethnic backgrounds marry and start families. In the UK, for example, intermarriage rates among some immigrant groups are quite high. Indian and Caribbean immigrants, for instance, have relatively high rates of marriage with native Britons, which has led to a growing population of mixed-race individuals. France offers another example, where a significant number of immigrants from North Africa are marrying outside their ethnic group. Studies show that about 40% of marriages involving immigrants in France are mixed, meaning that at least one partner is of native French or European descent. This trend suggests that in some parts of Europe, a melting pot is beginning to form, with a new generation of mixed ethnicity Europeans emerging. However, integration isn't happening evenly across the continent. In some countries and among certain immigrant groups, there's a tendency towards segregation rather than integration. Take the case of Turkish immigrants in Germany or Moroccans in the Netherlands. These communities have relatively low rates of intermarriage with the native population and tend to live in more insular communities. This can lead to a form of social isolation, where immigrant populations remain separate from the broader society. The risk here is that if these communities don't integrate, they could become marginalized, leading to social tensions and even conflict. The future of Europe depends on how well these different populations can come together. If integration is successful, Europe could emerge as a truly multicultural society, enriched by the contributions of its diverse populations. But if segregation persists, it could lead to a fractured society, with significant challenges in terms of social cohesion and national unity. The demographic changes brought about by immigration will have far-reaching economic implications for Europe. As the population becomes more diverse, and as the proportion of immigrants and their descendants grows, there will be significant impacts on the workforce, consumer markets, and even pension systems. Let's start with the workforce. As Europe's native population ages, there will be a growing need for young workers to support the economy. Immigrants and their descendants are likely to play a crucial role in this regard. With higher birth rates, these populations will contribute a significant share of the future workforce, helping to fill gaps in industries that are struggling with labor shortages. In countries like Germany, where the population is rapidly aging, the presence of a younger immigrant workforce could be a lifeline for the economy. But there are challenges too. If immigrant populations are not well integrated into the labor market, either because of discrimination, lack of education, or other barriers, there's a risk that they could be underemployed or stuck in low-paying jobs. This not only affects their economic well-being, but also limits their ability to contribute to the broader economy. Ensuring that immigrant populations have access to education, training, and employment opportunities will be crucial for Europe's economic future. Consumer markets will also be affected by these demographic changes. As the population becomes more diverse, the preferences and needs of consumers will change. This presents both challenges and opportunities for businesses. On one hand, companies will need to adapt to a more diverse consumer base, offering products and services that cater to different cultural backgrounds. On the other hand, a more diverse population could lead to increased demand for certain goods and services, driving economic growth. For example, the growing population of Muslim immigrants in Europe has already led to a boom in the halal food market, with businesses across the continent scrambling to meet the demand. Finally, we have to consider the impact on Europe's pension systems. With an aging population, many European countries are facing a pension crisis, where there aren't enough working-age people to support the growing number of retirees. The higher birth rates among immigrant populations could help alleviate some of this pressure, as a younger workforce means more people paying into the pension system. However, this will only be effective if these populations are truly integrated into the labor market and are earning enough to contribute meaningfully to the system. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.